Hi everyone, this is Philip Martin from the Phoenix Society. Today I'm going to be reviewing a sword from Kingdom of Arms, which is a relatively new company. This is an Irish ring pommel sword. Kingdom of Arms is run by Clyde Hollis, who used to run Legacy Arms. They made entry-level swords for many years, and they still do, but Clyde is no longer associated with them. He sold the company maybe eight and a half years ago. And then a couple of years ago, he started up this new company, Kingdom of Arms. And from what I can tell, they're making mid-range European sword reproductions, which I think is pretty smart, because that market was dominated for a long time by Valiant Armory. But recently, for a while now, they focused only on their higher-end Craftsman series. So there's a lot of room for sort of $500, $600, $700 European sword reproductions. The blades on these swords are made in the Philippines by Blade Culture International, who has made European swords of this general size for a long time, and they are known for having good heat treatment. Legacy Arms, of course, has had issues with their blades being a bit soft. If you go to Cult of Athena, they have this disclaimer on those swords, the longer blades, saying they don't call them battle ready because they can be a bit soft. But these Blade Culture International blades are well heat treated. This particular Irish ring pommel sword is very similar in size and dimensions to the largest of 5 swords of this type housed in the National Museum of Ireland. This sword has about a 3.8-inch grip. The smallest of those swords has a 2.8-inch grip. So these swords tend to have short grips, and that's important, but I'll get back to that later. I actually did some cutting with this sword last weekend, and I was going to have a video ready last weekend. But after cutting, I realized, and now I'm pretty convinced, that I was holding the sword wrong when I was cutting. But again, I'll explain that after this initial video. In these videos, the initial cuts you'll see, what I was trying to do was test the factory edge against an edge that I had sharpened to shaving sharp. So one of these edges is shaving sharp, and the other is exactly as it came from the factory, which is not quite shaving sharp. It's decently sharp, but not shaving sharp. And so let's take a look at how well the factory edge performs. So as can be seen in those cutting videos, the factory edge cuts very well, basically just as well as the edge has been sharpened to shaving sharpness. And I was impressed by that. That's unfortunately pretty rare with medieval reproductions, even higher end medieval reproductions. So the fact that this sword cuts well with a factory edge right out of the box really impressed me. So last weekend, I was in the process of gathering my thoughts for this video after having cut with the sword, and I was preparing to report back to you guys that while the sword cut very well, it was not comfortable to use. It did not handle well. As far as handling goes, so this is not a 2-pound sword with a 7-inch point of balance. This is a 2.5 or 2.6 pound sword with a 7-inch point of balance. So when you swing it hard, it really pulls you around. It's kind of difficult to control, difficult to recover. And also the second thing, which kind of goes hand in hand with that, this pommel is very uncomfortable. The straight cylinder design, where it's just a 9-degree intersection here on the edge, it's rounded over, so it's not sharp, but with that 9-degree edge, it just digs into your palm. And after using it, the heel of my palm was all red, and the next day when I touched it, it was sore. And this is the longest of those 5 swords in the collection in the National Museum of Ireland, right? So if you take the shortest, 2.8, and try to imagine cutting with a sword like this with that pommel, no way. It's going to be super, super uncomfortable. This one is difficult as it is. So I was going to put my thoughts together in a video, but I had some errands to run, so I went out, and while I was driving, a number of things occurred to me all at once. I believe that this sword is meant to be held with the finger over the cross, and I'll explain why. For starters, there's a 2-inch ricasso here, which invites a finger over the guard. The very short grip that we've been discussing, that becomes far less of an issue because your hand moves up on the grip. And the uncomfortable pommel, that's no longer an issue either because I'm not contacting the pommel. Other things to consider are that this type of blade, the Oakshott Type 19 blade, was around, and these type of swords were around during a time when there was a transition from cruciform hilts to complex hilts. So if you look, for example, at the Albion line of 19As, they have an Irish ring pommel sword. Then they have 2 other swords that both have a single finger guard, and then a 4th sword that has 2 finger guards, so Machiavelli, so you can hold it either way. We know that that swords with cruciform hilts were used with the finger over the grip with no finger protection for a while before finger protection was added to the hilt. As you can see in this artwork from the 15th century, the fingers over the guard on this sword with no finger protection, and it's being used in conjunction with a buckler, which is not surprising because one of the main features or one of the main uses of a buckler is to protect the sword hand. So all of those things have led me to believe that this sword is likely meant to be used with your finger over the cross. So in the following cutting video, I'll be cutting a couple of mats. The first mat, I'll just cut a cut combination I normally do with my finger over the cross, and we can see how the sword performs. And it performs well. It is much easier to control, and it works very well. But then the second segment in that cutting video is actually probably the most interesting because it demonstrates, I think, one of the most convincing reasons why a person would choose to use a sword, adding a little bit of extra risk by having that finger over the cross. What are they gaining from it? Well, you can, of course, think about thrusting advantages, controlling the tip, but there's also a big advantage when considering this sword as a cutting weapon when you put your finger over the cross. This is a side sword grip. If you were gripping an Arms & Armor Town Guard, your grip would be no different. You wouldn't feel the rest of the complex hilt, and it wouldn't aid you in any way in gripping the sword. It would still be 3 fingers on the grip, 1 over the cross. So this is a side sword grip, and with a side sword grip, you can basically deliver false edge cuts from any direction. So practicing HEMA, I use a lot of terms that we know in the HEMA community, but may not be that familiar to everybody watching this video. So what does a false edge cut mean? Well, if I cut straight ahead, my front edge is the true edge, and however I'm holding the sword, this is a double edge, so I can hold this way, I can hold this way, but whatever edge is forward is the true edge. Whatever edge is behind, which the back edge, is the false edge. And so cutting with the false edge from various directions, coming down like this, coming up with a rising false edge cut, it gives you a lot more angles to attack, makes the sword a lot more versatile, gives you a lot of advantages in a fight. So let's watch these cutting videos and see how this sword performs. So as you can see in that video, this sword performed the rising false edge cut very easily with the finger over the cross. That type of cut should not be attempted when holding a sword with a typical grip on a cruciform hilt. I've unfortunately seen on a couple of occasions people trying that cut, and in one particular instance, I saw someone who had just bought a brand new Atrim arming sword, $1,100 sword, had just taken it away from the table, paid for it at Gus's booth at a HEMA event. And they walked over to a cutting stand to test it out. They did a few descending cuts, maybe a true edge rising cut, and did really well. And then those of us watching them, saw him get into this position with the leg forward and the false edge pointing towards the stand, and we all just cringed. We knew it was coming next. And sure enough, he tried to deliver a rising false edge cut to the mat. And as soon as it encountered the resistance from the mat, it just peeled away the sword out of his grip. The sword flew through the air, and the area where the cutting stand was set up was roped off, so no one was near it, so no one was in danger. But that area was partially grass and partially gravel, so there were lots of rocks. And so this sword goes flying and then lands ching, 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 bouncing all over the rocks, scratches up the hilt and the blade and nicks the blade on this brand new sword. The issue is, when you're gripping a sword like this, if you receive resistance from the front, then let me get a dowel to demonstrate this. So if you're delivering a strike and you encounter resistance like this, then the resistance is pushing against your fingers, and your fingers are very strong. So that's not a problem. But if you are coming with the back side of the blade and you encounter resistance, then all that's needed is for the blade to slip out from under your fingers, and then it's gone. Because your thumb is very weak. Your fingers are strong, especially your pinky and your ring finger. These fingers are much stronger than your thumb. Your thumb's very weak. Very useful, opposable thumb and everything, but very weak. So putting the the finger over the cross changes that dynamic, and it allows false edge cuts basically from every direction. When I practice Bolognese swordsmanship at the Phoenix Society, which is the main art that I've studied there, when we did Bolognese Marazzo sword and buckler, we would practice false edge, false edge, true edge, false edge, true edge from every direction, because you can deliver strikes, and they're called out in Bolognese swordsmanship, which is a Renaissance art meant to be used with side swords and bucklers. Strikes can come with a false edge from any direction. So that's a big advantage, and one of the reasons I think that this sword is meant to be used with the finger over the cross, even though there's no protection for the finger. Overall, I'm very impressed with this sword. It's a $600 sword. If you buy it from Clyde's website, the Kingdom of Arms website, it's $690 with free shipping. But he has one online retailer, Buy the Sword, that sells it for $620 with free shipping. So I consider that a $600 sword, and for that you get this sword that performs very well. You get a scabbard, wood core, leather wrapped. It's got a brass shape and a brass accent there, and it has buckles for a harness or belt. It doesn't come with a belt, but you can certainly attach it to a harness with these buckles. As far as the main issue that I found in this review, which is that this is not a 2-pound sword, it's a 2.6-pound sword, my advice would be to Clyde would be just update the website. Listed as being 2.5 or 2.6 pounds, because it's a good sword as it is. Like I say, the dimensions, the width of the cross, the length of the grip are all very similar to the largest of those 5 examples in the National Museum of Ireland. So, I mean, I think it's a decent reproduction of this type of sword. Unfortunately, we don't know the weight of that sword because it only had about 1/3 of the blade remaining, so we don't know what happens down the blade, but it could be a 2.5-pound sword. I ran that by Dr. Nathan Clough from Arms and Armor and the Oakshott Institute, and he said, yeah, it could be 2.5 perhaps. So it's not the point is, it's not an overbuilt, overweight reproduction of a sword. It could be a pretty accurate reproduction. So I would just update the website, because really bringing this down to a 2-pound sword would require an end-to-end redesign, and I don't see the reason for that. I hope this review was helpful, and thank you for watching.